Barbara, what's so fascinating about this for me is you get into a thing that I've just been thinking about vaguely and mostly in wonder. How do you get these people to believe this nonsense? Why can't they separate fact from fiction? But you actually get in here and show which wires connect to what.
Yeah, so if you look at history, what Mussolini and Hitler did, the tactics really haven't changed. Maybe the delivery mechanism has changed a little bit with social media, cable television, but the messages are very similar to the ones that we saw Hitler and Mussolini use. Very simple messages, repeatable little slogans like "Stop the Steal." What Hitler wrote about in Mein Kampf, "Make the lie big." Everybody tells little lies, but would not have the audacity to tell a lie about something so significant. And so the fact that the lie that Trump has told about a stolen election is so big that, ironically, it becomes more believable. So those tactics have been documented throughout history. The
reason why I always thought we could just assume away that part of history is that those dictators all controlled their news media. There was no other voice in Russia than Stalin, in the Soviet Union, or in Germany than Hitler. But what we have here, what's happened is the voter has selected, in a way, to shut off all other information source and take the Fox propaganda and all the right wing and the Trump propaganda.
Yeah, we have now sorted ourselves into news bubbles where we listen to one side of information or another on social media. You heard that woman say, all my friends voted for Donald Trump. I'm sure she is in a Facebook group with a group of people, and perhaps she watches Fox News. So all she ever hears is the repeat of these ideas of a rigged election and that the investigations against Donald Trump are voter interference. And so she lives in that ecosphere. So in some ways, you're raising a good point that it replicates some of those controlled medias of prior decades.
How do you penetrate it?
Yeah, I think a couple of ways. One is we have to get people out of their basements and off the internet and into the real world. We need to be engaging with people on a human scale and not just talking at each other online. Online people are horrible. Mm-hmm. We are horrible to each other. We hide behind false personas or even just the nastiness that can be there when you're not seeing a human being face to face. So I think we have to see people face to face. I also think we have to understand that when someone has been duped, the last thing they want to hear is how foolish they have been. When I was a prosecutor, we often dealt with crime victims, people who were the victims of fraud. And they felt shame in having fallen for these things. So I think we have to show people grace. We have to ask them what is the evidence that they are citing and pointing to reach their conclusions, and try to help them see that evidence is necessary for us to reach conclusions. But I think we have to do it with grace and not with dunking on people by telling them, I told you so.
Michigan is one of the great places to study this, since there's been, those people who tried to kidnap and murder the governor. There's been this outburst of the most fanatical kind of behavior at the extreme end of what this book is about.
Yeah, and one of the points I make in the book is that how disinformation is creating dangers to public safety and the rule of law. And so when people are out there ginning up false claims, people become very angry. Why is this happening? Why isn't our law enforcement doing something about this? And so they become inclined to take the law into their own hands, which is what we saw with the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer and make a citizen's arrest, or what we saw on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. People didn't like what they heard, and they thought it was so unjust that they were going to take the law into their own hands. And that's when things become chaotic and incredibly dangerous.
Having studied this more closely than the rest of us have, where are you in the hope versus hopelessness curve?
Yeah, I worry that it's going to get worse before it gets better, but I do think there's hope. I think there are a couple things that we need to do. One is we need to change some laws and have more regulation in social media. We've allowed these giants to grow up, and in many ways they've created wonderful, innovative products. But without any regulation, they will defeat us with artificial intelligence and all the other things. And there are some modest proposals there for regulation. But I also think that we need to persuade people about the importance of truth. I think some people have been duped by the lies that have been fed to them in recent years. But I think there are many other people who are willing to go along with the con because they are choosing tribe over truth. And so they want to align themselves with a particular party, and it doesn't matter to them what the facts are. You know, Donald Trump could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose any voters. And I think he's right. And we need to care again that if we're going to have a democracy, then facts matter.
How much of it is Donald Trump? When Donald Trump goes away, which is either next year or 4 years from now, does this stuff start to deflate?
I don't know, but he certainly was the disruptor who caused it. But we now see a lot of people who have watched and learned his tactics. I worry that the next one who comes along could be even better at it. But we see people like Jim Jordan in Congress, who is leading investigations into the weaponization of government, which is, of course, just turning investigations on their head. We have seen members of the Republican Party try to impeach Joe Biden based on not just lack of information, but false information. And so I worry that now that this tactic is in their hands, that we can see other people try to wield it.
Barbara McQuade, great to have you here on Michigan's Big Night. Thank you very much for joining us. Barbara's book is called Attack from Within, right here. It is available right now.